Hello, everybody. Tonight, the Nebraska Writers Collective presents a workshop on how to get your poetry published. And I'm excited that we've got Tyler Jacobs with us. Tyler is a teaching artist, works out of Kearney, where he's been in the graduate program there. But he is also someone who has a book coming out from Stephen F. Austin University Press. Seems like any day now at this point, which is pretty fantastic. And in that book, once you buy it, Building Brownville, you will see that pretty much every single poem in that book has been published in a magazine or anthology. So I'm excited to have Tyler here to talk to us about getting poetry published. So, Tyler.
Thank you, Matt. Good. Yes. So I plan tonight to just be kind of casual, start with kind of from the bottom up. I figured let's start with the cover letter, and then we can move on to biographical notes, formatting your poems, and like resources where to find poems and stuff like that. And we'll just go over it. And as we go along, feel free to ask questions. I know the time is supposed to end at 7:30. So if we're getting close to that, I'll try to wrap up so we can end on some discussion time too. But so let's get going. So the cover letter, and this is of course like the very boring side of writing, the part that we all like despise so much, because
and then we're going to make that animal together. You want me to add to your creation?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. But yeah, this is just the briefcase work, as I like to call it, the stuff that we don't like to do, but it feels good, I guess, once we do it. So I do think the cover letter is more or less a formality of the process. You just kind of have to have one, and we never really talk about what goes into it. And I think that it should probably be the most boring part of your submission, or the most forgettable part, so your poems can shine a lot brighter. But the cover letter does do a couple things. It allows an introduction to yourself to the editors, and they can maybe know a little bit about you, or maybe know the work that you're submitting a little bit better that way. So let's just look at a couple of these, and now I don't know which it is because I have too many documents open. Oh, not that one. This is the problem with not saving anything on your computer. Okay, here we go. So I've kind of broken it down into why is this still sharing the... Okay, can you see the one where it says bad? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So I broke it down into like bad, generic, and like kind of personal cover letters. And this, of course, is exaggeration, but dear Taylor Jacob, of course, my name is Tyler, and Tyler Jacobs. So already this submitter is off to a bad start. Look at my poems and let me know if they work for your journal. And then I put in a little bio. Submitter name is pretty darn cool, and you should read his or her work. Here's their handles at submitter name. Thanks, dude. Submitter name. So, don't be this writer. But we can go into the more generic. I call it generic, but it's still like a great cover letter. I pretty much submit this all the time. It's because submitting is hard work, and it takes up a lot of our time. and you can kind of get lost. And next thing you know, like 2 hours have went by. And so if you're, really putting every cover letter to each journal, that can become even more time consuming. But yeah, I always start with up top here, just with my contact info in case they need that, or they have it, depending on whatever submission manager it's going through. And then dear editors, of course, if you know the editors, you can be more specific to, dear Tyler Jacobs, if I was the poetry editor. And then I always start with, here are my poems that I'm submitting. I usually always submit 3 to 5. And then I always have a paragraph, just a little about myself in here. So, and I usually have this different than my bio. And then I started putting in, of course, this part once that was picked up. But, you can always put in your accolades in here, which is a great habit to get into. Then they know kind of who else is picking up your work, where else you've appeared, stuff like that. And also here you could put in literary awards. You could put anything that has to do with your writing career. And then, I always say thank you for your time. And then I just attach my biographical note at the bottom. So it's already there. They don't have to ask for it again. Usually they kind of ask for it again, but I just got into the habit of doing this because, I submitted once without a bio and they never asked for one. And then what was put on there was kind of something like this. And I'm like, why would you leave it I? But so, things you learn along the process of submitting. And then I threw in a more personal biographical note. Again, if I were the editor, you could address me. Started out the same. You could put the journal to which you're submitting, the Tyler Review. You could throw in a note here. I recently discovered the journal, read this poem by poet, and then I just kind of kept the rest the same. And then, of course, biographical note. This one I never really approach. I think a great time to use something like this would be when you get one of those great rejections, asking to submit your work again later. You could address the editor that signed that rejection email. Something like that would be more personal. But yeah, I usually stick with the generic, but still good cover letter, because it just gets the point across. It's easy, it's professional, it's respectful, and then the only thing you have to really replace are your poem titles. So that is that for kind of showing the cover letter. Of course, I can continue to talk about a little bit more. But yeah, there's, as I said, it's just kind of a formality, I think, more or less. If you don't have one, I think that's a good reason to be, or that's, I think, a reason that editors find to, a quick reject, lest they have, get a little off their plate. And maybe not. Some journals don't ask for cover letters. They just ask for like artist statements and stuff. So it's all different depending on the journal. Do we have any questions about the cover letter before we move on?
I mean, I'm sure I kind of do.
Yeah.
I just kind of, what's your experience as an editor receiving cover letters? I think you got a little bit of this across, but like, is there any like example you've got of one that you're like, this was really cool that they did this, that might be something a little different, or if it's all kind of standard is the best?
Yeah. So I don't have much experience receiving cover letters, because the journal that I edited, I went to the University of Nebraska at Kearney as an undergrad. And so I was the editor-in-chief of the Carillon there, and we only published UNK students. So in order to keep a, you know, reading blind and as anonymous as possible, I didn't get to see any of that stuff. We just put all of the pieces blindly into our Canvas page and read that way. So I don't have much experience receiving cover letters.
Okay, cool. Just curious.
Yeah, I wish I did. Then I could have like better examples than just making up like my own kind of bro cover letter there. But yeah, I guess I will say, if we're all like, say if there's someone in this chat or watching later that has never submitted anything, or has had a piece accepted, or hasn't maybe been a part of like the writing community or something, it's okay not to have that last paragraph that your work has appeared somewhere, or literary awards, because we all have to start somewhere eventually.
What part of the cover letter would you say maybe helps you get the most submissions accepted? Like when you submitted it with the biography, did that get you more acceptance with your submissions?
Interesting. I haven't thought of it so much. I've kind of kept it similar for a while, because it just felt like it was working what I was doing. I think after I got that first acceptance into a literary magazine, it kind of started to snowball a little bit more. Yeah, once maybe magazines saw that someone had published, or being a part of like the Carillon, things like that, being involved in the community, I think helps. Stuff like that, showing active involvement.
Cool.
Yep. I don't know if the cover letter really does that much though, either. It's hard to say. I'd like to think the poems do the work. But
Definitely.
but yeah, let's see. I think that's really it for the cover letter, unless there's more questions. But yeah, if you need something, I think there's always a way to find involvement in something in the writing community to add to that, and just, you could even say, like, if you attend the Nebraska Poetry Society readings often, I don't know, you could probably throw that in there, and that could work too. It never hurts trying anything and throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, because that's kind of what the process seems to be a lot. But yeah, this, I think, gets you started with that initial step in the process. Yeah, any other questions before we move on?
Hey, it's Holly. Can I just add something?
Yes,
Matt
please.
asked earlier about, like, as an editor, what like looks good, I guess. And I read a lot of submissions, and you don't have to personalize your cover letter to every editor. That would take so much time. But I think just not being afraid of not having ink. Like, we published someone in my lit journal last issue that had never been published before, and he wrote in his bio, "This will be my first published piece." And like, that was so earnest. And like, you don't have to try to be something that you're not. Like, just be your most authentic self in your cover letter and in your bio. And I think that really goes a far, like, it goes really far, like, to feel like you're a person and not just a machine that sends out submissions all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great addition, Holly. Yeah, be
And I
yourself.
guess as I think everybody here is a Nebraskan, and we always sell ourselves short. So if you got something that's like, well, this is cool, but I don't know, it was like 5 years ago, put it in the cover letter. Put your stuff, like Tyler says, put your best foot forward, and accept the fact that if you're sending things out, you got to give it a shot. You got to believe in it and show that you believe in the work. So don't hold back either. So
Okay, let's move on to bios, because I do think that is kind of an important step in the process, because that's what the public sees for sure, is your bio. And mine right now is I just put Tyler Michael Jacobs. His words in are forthcoming. The Oakland Arts Review, Sierra Nevada, White Wall, among and elsewhere. He's a graduate of the University of Nebraska at Kearney and Building Brownville. His first full-length collection of poems is forthcoming from Stephen F. Austin. So right now, that's what I put. I grabbed one that I wanted to read because I think it's just the best. And I'm actually not sure when the book was published, but it's the Nebraska Sesquicentennial Anthology, and it's Clef Corn's bio in it. And it's the last line. Basically, his bio is similar to what I had. So I'll just read the last line for you. And in addition to his literary honors, he won first place in the 1978 Nebraska Hog Calling Championship. So whether or not he wrote that or somebody did, I just think that's the most authentic bio I've read. I laugh at it, I think, or I laugh with it. I think of it often. And so, yeah, it's okay to be funny in your bio if you're naturally funny. A lot of people in their bios put what they do for a living if they're not. I just read in a journal that they were like a physician, or here in the Good Life Review. I'll share the screen and we'll read this one. Christina Lagarda, her bio. Christina Lagarda was born in the Philippines and spent her early childhood there before moving to Bethesda, Maryland. She is now a practicing physician in Boston. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in journals. So a lot of poets put, they live in a place with their family. So really the bio is however you want to approach it. If we want, we can take a few minutes and we can maybe jot some notes down, write a bio and share it if you'd like. Yeah, let's take a few minutes, like 5 minutes, and then we can come back after that. For Casey, who just joined, we are going to take 5 minutes to write a bio, our biographical note, and I will just read you mine again, catch you up. Tyler Michael Jacobs has words in or forthcoming, the Oakland Arts Review, Sierra Nevada Review, White Wall Review, and elsewhere. He is a graduate of the University of Nebraska at Kearney, and Building Brownville's first full-length collection of poems is forthcoming from Stephen F. Austin State University Press. So the bio can be really anything you want. It's a way to promote yourself, promote your other publications, a book, awards, what you love, your dog, your family. Don't hold back. Share what they wrote for their bio. If not, we can move on. Okay.
I don't know if I got enough time to really finish it out, but I put Jamontre Avant is a journalist, proficient in technical work and an avid dog lover. Various articles, editorials, and poems can be found in the archive of the Omaha Magazine umbrella of publications, covering subjects including social justice warriors, arts, and entertainment. That's all I got.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's great. And one thing to think about bios is most places have a 50 to 150 word limit. So the shorter the better. In most instances, I think Carl Phillips in his new and selected book, Then the War, is bio is he lives and teaches in city and state, and that's all he put for it. So I can't remember where he lives, but yeah. So it can be anything you want to share. Anyone else want to share before we move on?
Okay, I'll be brave. Nancy Northcutt is a Nebraska native. She's lived in Chicago and in the California mountains and desert, and has had more jobs than she can count, including research librarian and detective. This will be her first published poem.
Oh, that's perfect.
The end.
Thank you for sharing. No, this is great. We're getting started. So that's makes me happy to see. So for time, let's move on a little bit to where to find journals, because I know that's a big one. At least for me starting out, you're kind of lost and you end up submitting to places that maybe you're like, oh no, I wish that poem wasn't in that journal. But that's just kind of how it goes a little bit sometimes. Poets and Writers is a great place to kind of do a little bit of research, which is important when trying to find literary magazines or know how they pay you. Sometimes the information isn't totally accurate and sometimes they're not on here, but it's just pw.org. And if you go here to publish your writing, literary magazines, you can filter it to any genre, and then, you know, filter to poetry specifically. We can look at Two River View. So it's just a great space to ask your questions. What is their circulation? If it says, how do they pay? How many times do they publish or they print online, etc. And one good thing to note is like web journals are just as good as print journals. So there's so many great online journals right now, and some that I'm just like, oh, why do you keep rejecting me? But we'll get in there eventually. So these are just things to think of. And also, who are they publishing? You know, you can kind of see some, and up here you can click on it. Like one that we can look at that, you know, we probably all know is Prairie Schooner. You know, we can look at their payment is contributor copies only. They print. It says somewhere their circulation is anywhere from 2,500 to 5,000 copies, according to Poets and Writers. So this is great work. You're going to know who and how many people might see your work. And then again, you know who's kind of in that one. Also, another great resource is, of course, the acknowledgements pages of your favorite poetry books. Because, you know, you can see, oh, I really like this poet. My work might be in conversation with them. I'll try submitting to some of the places they submitted. And then another great resource is Twitter. If you start following poets and presses and literary magazines, you'll start to see a lot more if you have Twitter or not. But that is a wildly, incredibly great resource for finding literary magazines and knowing who's open for submissions. So one thing to think about is when you're doing your research is just know, like, are they asking you to pay them to be in their magazine? Because then that's not cool. And that's something we never talk about, is like vanity presses or stuff like that, is that kind of predatory process of it. You know, oh, if you pay us this much, we'll put you in our anthology, or, oh, we'll print you, but you have to sell so many copies. You know, those are things to look out for. And, you know, just kind of big red flags on that. Another thing is when you're looking at literary journals, do you have to pay a reading fee to submit, or can you just submit for free? That's a big one. That I always advocate for going for the, you know, free submissions, because sometimes $3 reading fees add up, and it's kind of hard to, you know, keep doing that. And why not just, you know, submit your work to Poetry Magazine and the New Yorker and Paris Review? I think all of those are free. The worst they can do is say no. But yeah, so, and I know a lot of places say reading fees go toward, you know, paying editors or keeping their submittable up, or their web fees and stuff. So a lot of journals it's helping out too, maybe, but it just adds up. So consider that when you're submitting. Do we have any questions on how to find journals and that process before I move on? So let's see.
I'm just glad you talked about the evils of vanity presses.
Yeah, and I think that can be a lot harder once you get like a full-length manuscript too, and going that process. So I haven't seen too much of it at maybe the literary magazine level, but you see it a lot more with books for sure. So when submitting, you know, it's one thing to definitely look at, you know, university press journals, or, you know, because a lot of times it's undergrads getting practice and stuff like that. They're a great resource to submit your work to. Plus, you know, we have some great journals in Nebraska, the Good Life Review, Vast Chasm Magazine. And then there's Plain Songs and the Schooner, of course. I might be missing some, but those are some that are doing, you know, really cool stuff right now. But yeah, we can move on a little bit from that for time. So once you start submitting, let's look at how to format poems before we move on. So of course, this is just how I do it. So this is a new kind of suite or manuscript or series of poems. These are all mean the same thing, just your submission. I usually just left a line, unless your style is doing something really interesting with your style. This is kind of the way that most places will ask for it. One poem per page, and then stuff. I capitalize my titles. I don't know, that's just a habit I picked up early on. There's no really rhyme or reason other than to make sure, you know, oh, this is the title and this is the poem. It may have backfired more often than not, like showing up in journals and they've just put the title in all caps. And I was like, oh, you didn't need to do that, but okay. You know, and I just haven't broken myself of that habit. So there's no reason you have to continue doing that. But each magazine will show you or tell you pretty much what they want when it comes to their submission guidelines. So we can look at one right now. We'll just find a random journal from, and this is submittable. I don't know. We'll just look at this one. Oh, that's not a good one. I should have paid more attention to what I was doing. So Sun Spotlit, let's see. So they want 1 or 2 pieces. This, of course, isn't that bad, or good, but usually they'll say how they want their poems submitted. They'll say 3 to 5 poems usually. they'll say if they want it read blind, or if they want your name on the pages, or if they want it paginated or not. So those are things. Just follow the submission guidelines and you'll be all right. But that gets tough too, because everyone wants something a little bit different. Unless they want something drastically different, I pretty much just submit 3 to 5 poems, all Times New Roman, 12-point font, and just, hope for the best most of the time. But that is an important thing to follow, because that's another easy way for the editors to reject the work, is not following submission guidelines. So just definitely keep that in mind when you're going through it. 3 to 5 poems is normal or average, and that's just so you have a variety of work. Some journals, of course, want only 1 poem at a time, which is totally cool. It kind of frees up work for you to submit to more places and whatnot. Do we have any questions on formatting poems before we move on?
I always wonder that when they say 3 to 5, I'm always kind of compulsively send 5, because it's just like I've had, sometimes I'll have 4 poems that I think they'll like, and I'm like, oh, and I'll just throw in a 5th, and they always like the 5th and not the 4 that I thought they would like. I'm just wondering if you've had thoughts or experiences, if you just kind of do, well, I got 3, so.
Yeah. It's both. Sometimes sometimes if they want 7 poems, I'm like, oh, cool, I'll just throw in 4 extra, thinking like, oh, they'll want one of the first 2, and they take like the 7th one. I'm like, why? But that is also part of it, is like right now I'm just kind of crazy busy, so I only have like 3 or 4 to submit, and at the moment, so it's just kind of 3. The way I do approach it is like I put my favorite first, and then I kind of put one in the middle that maybe I'm like, oh yeah, that one's all right, that one's whatever, and then I kind of always end with another one of my favorites. That's kind of how I structure it too. So they hopefully end positively, begin and end positively. Any other questions? So the last thing I think we'll talk about is let's see. Let's talk about like types of rejections and what to do. So I think there's like 3 types of rejections. There's the thanks but no rejection, which kind of always seems a little harsh, but it's honest. We can't really blame it, I suppose. And then there's the rejection where it's very encouraging. It's like, hey, we loved your work, it's not a right fit now, keep at it. Which is always nice to hear, I suppose. At least if you're going to be rejected, that's a nice enough way to do it. And then there's that one rejection that's really great, like, hey, we loved your work, it didn't fit now, but please send us more. And that's the one you always want. And I always say, if you get one of those, well, despite all 3 rejections, you should always send more work once you have it. But the one where they're asking for more work, depending on their guidelines, just always submit 3 more poems to them while it's fresh in their minds. And like, oh, I just read Tyler's work, it was great. Maybe they pay more attention to it. Maybe it gets put at the top of the pile the next morning. They read it fresh, not after reading 100 poems before lunch or right after lunch. There's a lot of reasons to get rejected that don't have anything, and I would say most of them don't have anything to do with your work. A lot of them are, someone had a bad breakfast and now no one can be happy. But that's it. I think for the most part, one thing that I always like to talk about is when you're talking to editors, I think it's really important to be respectful, when you're engaged in conversation with them, because you want to work with them again and they want to work with you again, or you want them to want to work with you again. So you see it all the time on Twitter, someone said some kind of rude after a rejection, and then that they don't get published at that place ever again, and maybe other places. So yeah, it's just talking well, because as an editor, I could tell you, I had an experience where, like, my fiction editor and I, because we printed our journal, and we talked about this piece, and there were like big gaps between the paragraphs, and it was a fiction piece. And we were like, does the story need it? And we kind of ultimately decided that no, it didn't. And that shaved off like 2.5 pages, 3 pages of print in the way that we had it formatted. And so once the journal was printed, of course, a lot of things got put to the side because this was March 2020, but they were very unhappy with what we did. And that's really hard, because that's happened to me. I've submitted poems where they were kind of like monastic stanzas, just one line with, stanza breaks between them. And they just smunched it all up into one big, kind of block. So that's something that happens too. I've experienced, but that's a big lesson. Is the second year that I edited the journal, we sent out galleys and then had everybody approve their poems and fiction pieces. So that wouldn't happen again. So we could have, everyone be happy. But that won't always happen. You won't always get to approve galleys, but it's important, say like your name is misspelled, to bring that up, or your title's misspelled, just be respectful about it. And because they want their journal to be the best, but ultimately you care most about your work because you're the one that created it. But despite all this business and briefcase work, the most important thing is your poems, and whether or not you get an acceptance or a rejection, you just got to keep writing, write the next one, revise, and then the next after that, and keep going and keep submitting. And that's the big thing, is if you just consistently stay after it, the odds are that eventually you start to get published. So that's
I have a question.
I have. Yeah.
What are the rules? I mean, I know they're going to be different, but I've never understood simultaneous submissions.
Oh, great. That's perfect. So yeah, you know what? I'll just share my submittable page and we'll just be okay with that. So one of those, I like simultaneous submissions over exclusive submissions, because some journals, they sometimes your work, you have 3 poems and you submit to a journal, and then your work sits with them for like 8 months and you can't do anything with it if you really want to be in the journal. So like one way to approach that is you either have to submit those 3 poems and do nothing with them until you hear back, or don't submit and submit to a few places. So like right now I have really the same suite of poems at a few journals, and so one had gotten published the other day. And so what I do is, after that, you just go in and I just put this poem has been accepted elsewhere. Usually you put it in the notes section of your submittable. A lot of times the journal will have like, I think Agni, I think that's how it's pronounced, from Boston University, they ask that you email them if you get a piece accepted elsewhere, stuff like that. Just usually says in the guidelines. Does that answer your question a little bit?
I was just wondering if it was okay to do across the board.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think,
Because I've heard some horror stories, and I have to admit that's one of the things that's frightened me.
oh yeah, that's one of those things too. Like with the poem that just got picked up, they also wanted another piece that was picked up like months ago. And I did put in the notes that that poem was picked up. So I just emailed it back. I was like, yes, this one's available, but this one's not. And they were like, thanks for letting us know. I suppose.
I have friends that buy me drinks for every 10 rejections that I get. It
Yeah,
keeps you
that's good.
positive.
Yeah, I had an experience like that. To a place took one of my other poems.
And so whether this get to that point intentionally.
That was one of my poems that was accepted somewhere else, and I told them it wasn't available. They still took it, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's that. And you know,
Okay. Yeah,
not-
that's similar to stories that I'd heard. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
yeah, I just put it
Thanks.
in my acknowledgements page of my book that it was reprinted there. I think that hopefully covers anything that goes with it. So yeah. But yeah, I definitely encourage simultaneous submissions for sure, because exclusive submissions, I think, in a lot of ways are nobody really holds to it anymore, only a few places. And that's like, or places that only want submissions by mail. I'm like, you expect me to print out poems? My gosh, okay.
Hey, come on, man. I used to do that. I went through a lot of stamps once.
Yeah, that's actually like my first submission. I was like 19. I was like, yeah, I can get in the Paris Review. And they were still taking mailed submissions. So that was
Well, back when I thought that I could be a street journalist and thought I was doing all these wonderful, it was the same thing by mail. I didn't realize people ask for poems by mail. Please
Yeah,
don't let me ever come across that, because I just got organized online.
that's
Thanks
great.
thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
I had wanted a workshop like this, and my students are going to turn in on Sunday. So thank you.
Oh, great.
Definitely.
Any other questions before our time is up? It looks like we have 2 minutes left. Anything I didn't cover or you want to know more about?
What are the main type of poems that you have gotten published? What have you had the most success with?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. That's also a hard one to answer. Gosh, I don't know. The ones that I was least excited about, it seemed too, like, so a lot of them that are published in my book, I think, seem to be more of an internalization of like the experience. That's how maybe I would say it. And some of the stuff that I'm writing now is definitely a lot more external and observational, which is isn't I'm not seeing as much publication immediately. I'm also submitting to like giving my hand at like Plowshares and like Kenyon Review, which are a lot harder to get into, it seems, than some of the other ones that I've submitted to in the past. But I have a lot of luck in like university journals, Thin Air magazine and Sierra Nevada. Those work well for me, I think.
Mhm.
Any other questions before we end the session tonight?
All right. Well, thank you, Tyler. We appreciate your
Thanks,
time.
Tyler.
Yeah, thank you all for being here.
And if anybody has any follow-up questions, they can email me, director@anywriters.org. And also thanks for coming. We've got another workshop on Sunday with Holly Pileski. It's aimed at teens, but anybody can stop by because it'll be much, much of the same info, a little bit, just a little bit different. If you like these workshops, we encourage you to donate to the Nebraska Writers Collective who put them on. But these are free, so no pressure. But if you have too much money, we'll help you. It helps pay for our teaching artists and all the great poetry programs we run. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Stick around for a few minutes if you still have questions, and we'll help. But thanks for spending an hour with us.